Level design was a real pain point. Between the endless ladders and doors and switching between world states, I would often get completely lost. In my over 30 hours of playtime, I really cannot explain to you what has happened. I got lost many times in Lords of the Fallen.
What's up, everybody? So the channel Skill Up just dropped a review on Lords of the Fallen, and there are some interesting takes, to say the least. Now, they are being extremely fair, they're giving credit where credit is due with the environment and so on, but there are some very weird takes, especially about level designs, and I think that it completely contradicts what a true Souls-like is about in the first place. Now, this review is nowhere close to as unhinged as the Armored Core 6 preview was, but it's still very interesting. Let's dive deep into it.
In my over 30 hours of playtime, I really cannot explain to you what has happened other than the fact that I have cleansed some beacons. The characters you meet rarely respond to your actions, the bosses you've cleared, the locations you've been to. Like the main dude who finds you and bestows upon you this grand quest to cleanse the beacons, I was constantly revisiting him after each beacon and boss. Nothing. The same dialogue as when we first met at the start of the game.
So he seems to have an issue with the convoluted plot, which is actually a staple of the genre. I remember playing my first Souls game, it was Dark Souls 2, and I killed Nashandra, the credits rolled, and I told myself, what just happened? And that's why I really love these games. They don't give you the plot on a silver platter. You have to do a little bit of work yourself to figure out what the hell's happening, either by some environmental storytelling or by reading item descriptions. Miyazaki said in interviews that he didn't really know how to read English properly, and when he was reading a book, he had to fill in the blanks, and he applied that in the video games, which makes for beautiful storytelling. So to have the take that the story is obscure is a little bit strange, to be honest.
But the narrative doesn't ever feel like it's going somewhere or building to something. There's a real lack of urgency or even stakes. I mean, you're never really given much insight into who Adir is or what kind of prosperous life humanity was living before the recent invasion. But the real problem with traversal is level design. It's hard to put into words because good level design is something you almost don't notice. Like in hindsight, I don't think I gave enough credit to Lies of P's level design, which managed to keep you moving forward, offering generous shortcuts and visual cues that meant I rarely ever got lost in the game. I got lost many times in Lords of the Fallen. I thought maybe it's just me being oblivious, but others I've spoken to have also had a problem with this. It's something to do with the lack of visual aids. Like, you just come across doors upon doors. Some of them are shortcuts, but some require specific keys. Once you've opened them all, it's hard to decipher which one of those doors is the way forward. There is also no map. You only have these journal entries to guide you, which are sort of sketches that point you towards specific landmarks.
There is no map. Right, that is quite an interesting take, because before Elden Ring, Souls-likes didn't have a map. They just didn't. You had to figure out where you were going and try to remember the environment, and that's part of the charm. Imagine if this guy was playing Dark Souls 1 on release, he would have been completely confused with no guides telling you where to go. I mean, when I first played Dark Souls 1, I went in the catacombs for hours and just got completely obliterated. Same thing with Dark Souls 2 with Heidi's Tower of Flame. And that's the whole beauty about these games. They give you all these options, but then you have to figure it out for yourself where you have to go. So once again, it's a very questionable take that if you're used to these types of games, this should be perfectly fine, because we have examples of really poor level design, and I'm talking about the Surge 1. Everything looked like an elevator shaft, a corridor with the exact same paint. It was extremely confusing. This is not the case by a long shot.
I don't mind this, to be honest. I'm always an advocate for moving away from mini-maps and waypoint markers, but when everywhere within a zone looks so samey, this doesn't do quite enough to alleviate the confusion. It's worse in the Umbral Realm, which you're forced to go to, where much of these landmarks are now obscured by all the skeletal structures. The white ghouls you use to pull across platforms and unlock doors kind of blend in with all the other pale enemies and architecture. As I said in the intro, the combat in Lords of the Fallen is just okay. I wouldn't call it bad, but it isn't great either. I mean, it's a Souls-like, it'll feel immediately familiar to you if you're into this genre, but with a few notable exceptions. First of all, on keyboard and mouse, the controls are really overloaded. I mean, it feels like you've got to use almost every key on the keyboard. There's like 4 different functions bound to the lantern, all on separate keys. You might have multiple spells slotted that are also bound to different keys. It's a bit of a mess, to be honest. Inversely though, on controller, which is my favorite way to play these games, I dare say these are some of the best controls for a Souls-like. I mean, for goodness sakes, you can click the left stick to sprint.
With that, I will definitely agree with him. The fact that you can just click the stick and sprint. Also, the fact that you can map out individual spells to individual buttons. I really like that you can switch from melee to range mode, and then you have all your multiple options, which is different ammunitions or different spells. I find this a lot easier than the Souls games where you have to scroll to the left or right looking for each individual spell. And then when you have 7 or 8 of them, sometimes it takes a lot of time to get to the spell you want. As for the combat being mid, personally, I went in here with expectations that it won't be Elden Ring. And it's not. It just never will be to the level of polish that From Software delivers. But it's definitely very good. It's high up there with the best of the Souls-likes, just like Lies of P. So it is very good. You cannot go in here and expect Bloodborne quality, Elden Ring quality. That's just not feasible. So I know the developer said that this is basically Dark Souls 4.5. I would disagree. It's not on the level of polish, but it's still a very good game.
Animation and camera issues also hold this back. Many of your attacks thrust you very far forward, often screwing up your positioning, especially during boss fights where a single misstep can end in disaster. Could immediately tell that something was off with the camera. I mean, lock-on cameras are a fickle thing. You don't want it to focus so slow that you can't properly track your target, like Atlas Fallen, but you also don't want it to move too fast. You know, there's a real balance here that most modern Souls-likes have nailed down. It's too fast here, straight up. If you're up against multiple enemies or body parts, your camera snaps between them in an instant, which can be quite dizzying. Especially bad against the bigger bosses. Holy moly, really difficult to track attacks when all you can see are their feet. You'll use the lamp in combat as well, but this suffers from similar camera issues. You can rip the soul from an enemy and attack that for big damage, but the camera kind of pans around it as you do so, which can get a little frustrating.
So he had a couple of interesting takes here. He's saying that some of the attacks thrust you extremely far from where you were standing, and that just comes to learning your equipment. If you learn your weapon, you will be able to gauge the distance where your weapon will land. And I know exactly what he's talking about, but it could also be an advantage. It gives you a huge reach if you want to close in the gap on an enemy that's far. So that's just a question of learning your arsenal and learning how to gauge distances properly. Regarding his complaint for the camera, now that's a strange one, because as you guys all know, the worst enemy in the Dark Souls series is not the mimic chest, it's actually the camera. It will happen from time to time that you get pinned in a corner and then the camera flips around, you can't see your character, and then you're screwed. This is actually typical of the From Software games, especially the older ones, but in this game I didn't see it at all. So I have no clue where he's coming from with these camera issues, because when I adjusted the sensitivity, everything was perfectly fine.
Speaking of enemies, this game throws a lot of ranged enemies at you. Their projectiles are fast. For the most part, you will not be able to side strafe them and will have to burn dodge rolls. Not a big fan, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, the ranged combat is enough to deal with them, but is this fun? Not really, particularly when you're up against multiple melee enemies and there's some ranged dude in the corner taking pot shots at you.
Let me know if you recognize the image on screen. I'm sure a lot of you will know exactly what I'm talking about. And my point with this image is that a lot of enemies ambushing you with spells while you're fighting melee enemies is nothing new to the genre. But what Lords of the Fallen is doing, on the other hand, is that it's giving you so many ranged options to deal with those enemies. So if there was that many ranged enemies but no options to fight them, I would agree that it's cheap. But in this case, there's plenty of tools at your disposal. It's kind of like how in Lies of P it's mostly a melee game and that there's not that many ranged enemies. And the reason why is because the player doesn't have that many range options. Yes, you have the Legion arm, but that has a very limited use, which in this game, it's clearly not the case.
Quick note on unlocks. 30 hours in, I have not unlocked the ability to respec my points. Don't know what that's about. I can speak to the character who does it, but the option is grayed out. She hasn't asked me to get anything, just has the same dialogue as usual. Maybe that's a bug too? I don't know. I leveled the same criticism at Lies of P, and I'm going to say it again here. This is a genre all about trial and error. Please, for the love of God, let me respec early on. I am tired of farming souls to try out new playstyles.
Now, he's not 100% wrong about this, that in this game, respecking is very limited. You can buy one of the Rebirth Chrysalis for 8,000 Vigor from Mulhu and Skyrest, but it is very limited. However, in Lies of P, that is one of the most forgiving game when it comes to respecs. Because once you unlock the money tree, you can respec as often as you want, and if you put the alchemist booster in it, you can respec quite often. So Lies of P was extremely generous, but it did lock that feature until chapter 7, which is perfectly fine. This is a Souls-like after all. You need to commit to your build and not be able to freely swing back and forth. Respecking in all the Souls games, and especially Elden Ring, has always been very limited, and that's why it makes your build choices and your attribute points important. It's a very important decision. So if you were to give the opportunity to the player to freely respec whenever they want, you kind of take that importance away from that decision.
What about the unique boss weapons? I would love to tell you, if I had any. Again, bafflingly, I have not unlocked the ability to cash in these boss drops for their unique weapons. Maybe I've missed something. Obviously, when guides are released into the wild, this will be less of a problem, but yeah, I don't know. I get that Souls-likes are just like this, but to hide such a crucial element is so strange to me. I would have loved to have seen how these boss weapons might have changed things up, but I just didn't have the means to do so.
So yeah, unlocking boss weapons in this game is surprisingly easy. All you have to do is get the Bowl of Revelations from the Umbral version of the Pilgrim's Perch area. Once again, that's something you would have found if you explored a little bit more, but I don't entirely blame him for that because all big YouTubers are like that. They want to get their review out on time, so they rush through the game as fast as possible so they have enough time to edit their footage and to post their review when the embargo drops. And that's actually very common with big time YouTubers. They will rarely do all the optional content to give you the full picture because they want their content to be available when everybody else is posting, and that's perfectly fine. I'm a YouTuber myself. I know you should always chase the views no matter what. But I guess that's just a byproduct of having to post a review at a certain date. Now that's pretty much it for the video. He had some other interesting takes, but I think we've covered enough. Now, one other issue I have with his video is that as soon as you hit play, you're hit with a sponsorship. Right off the bat, it's a 1-minute ad read, and that's perfectly fine. I'm all for sponsorships, but putting it right before the video starts is not even a good move because people will just skip it. The advertiser probably isn't getting his money's worth. But where it gets really weird is at the end, there's a whole 3 minutes of ad read. So on top of watching YouTube's ad, you're watching 4 minutes of ads throughout a 24-minute long video. Anyways, it is what it is. Now, this review is not necessarily negative. He said that it's mixed. He was recommending to his viewers that they wait till the game is on special to buy it, which is kind of odd because the reasons why he's recommending that are just very strange and are actually very typical in Souls-like games. Anyways, let me know what you think about this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.